film Hollow Rising in the Desert of the Jews in New Mexico. And Isaac is the founder of Cinewest Productions, a company he developed over 20 plus years ago to create and distribute documentaries focusing on the Americas and the Southwest. And of late, he's been focused on a more of a frontier Jews story, a Jewish series, if you will. So focusing on the Tehuano Jews, in which Isaac has a really interest in that one because he's actually from Tijuana. So kind of, the Jewish community he was born into in Tijuana, Mexico. There's also been a film on Jewish San Diego. Some of us on here may have seen a film back in March on crypto Jews called The Hidden Jews of the South, A Long Journey of the Hidden Jews of the Southwest. Obviously, Hollow Rising in the Desert of the Jews in New Mexico, which we're going to talk about today. And there's also some other films coming up around the corner as well, kind of connected to the Jews of the Southwest. So thanks for coming today, first off, again. This is really a Q&A session, so feel free to put any questions you have in the chat. We'll talk more about the film and learn more about the inner workings of making the film and making this film specifically a Hollow Rising in the Desert of the Jews in New Mexico. And Isaac, I guess I'll start with a question that probably you always get asked, to start any of these series you do is, what's the genesis, the origin of these films about the Jews in the Southwest? Where does that come from? And specifically, why New Mexico? What was the attraction to do a film on the Jews in New Mexico?
Okay, well, I wanted to thank you first for organizing this wonderful event, this Q&A. We had a lot of fun last time. I also want to mention, before I talk about the genesis of this film, that in just watching the trailer, it just brought memories of working pretty much with the same creative team that I've been working with for like the last 6 or 8 years. They're a talented bunch, and they always make me look good as a director. Well, the genesis of this film actually starts, in a conversation I had with my producer, Paula Amar Schwartz. I was in New Mexico, about 15 years ago, with the documentary we mentioned, Tijuana Jews, about my own Jewish community growing up in Tijuana. And it went really well. It's been a real crowd pleaser, Tijuana Jews. It's a very unique film. And obviously because of the personal context, it really communicates to a larger audience. Years after I presented Tijuana Jews, sponsored by the New Mexico Jewish Historical Society, I got a call from Paula, and she knew I announced at that screening in New Mexico that I would love to do a documentary on Jewish New Mexico. It's a state that I've loved all my life, and that I'd be thrilled to do it. And again, a couple of years later, Paula reached out to me and she said that as the new director of the Jewish Historical Society, she would really love to help me do this documentary. She mentioned, and I already knew from my visit to New Mexico, that this Jewish Historical Society had done a great, very epic oral or videograph history, if you will, of the Jewish community of New Mexico. And they had the advantage of interviewing a lot of the descendants of the pioneers, of the 19th century pioneers of Jewish New Mexico. So there was a lot of interest, a lot of, if you will, background work that they had done. I had met some of the members of the Jewish Historical Society, a lot of historians and great community people that were all of Paula's friends. So before I know it, we're interviewing 40 plus people in New Mexico. And with the challenge that we always have as filmmakers, you come back to your editing room and what do you do with 40 to 50 hours of material that has to be reduced into a 90-minute film? Well, what you do is, first of all, you get a really, really good editor. In this case, my colleague and collaborator, Keith Shapiro, and you basically print out all the interviews, print out, in quote marks, you do PDFs these days. And there's now wonderful programs that provide instant transcripts. You plug it into your editing system and they do a transcription, fairly accurate voice recognition. Then you kind of retrieve for a week with the proverbial yellow highlighter and start highlighting those 50 hours of interviews with the idea of quotes that that speak to the themes. You have to identify the themes. Every film has its own themes, and that's what you choose. Anything that speaks to that theme, you choose. The rest stays in the proverbial editing room floor, which is now your backup disk drive, of course. So once you have that, you come back with hopefully about 90 minutes of statements, of interviewed statements that speak to those themes. And Keith and I always laugh, when we say, okay, what are the themes of this Jewish documentary? Well, very similar themes of the other Jewish documentaries I've done, and they are identity, identity, identity. That's what Frontier Jews series is all about, our identity.
You at the start of the film, well, the title is very creative, Challah rising in the desert, and so there's a talk of the 5 strands of the Challah, representing the 5 different, I guess, 5 main periods of Jewish culture that you highlight in the film. The conversos, the Jewish pioneers of the 1800s, Los Alamos, the counterculture, and today. Using that Challah metaphor, it wasn't created by me. I know it wasn't created by you. Who created that Challah metaphor?
Oh, very good question. That was created by my producer, who I mentioned, Paula Marschwartz, who's a very gifted poet. And she said that before we didn't have a title, I was lobbying for Jews with bolo ties, but she didn't like that. But she says, Isaac, I had a dream and I wrote it as a poem. And it was about, the 5 strands of the Challah, representing these 5, periods of Jewish experience in New Mexico, if you will. And then she explained to me that the 5-strand Challah is a ceremonial Challah, so it would be very fitting for a film. And also, they have a wonderful, wonderful team of challah bakers at Congregation Albert, the congregation that she belongs to in Albuquerque. So we went to, we filmed the challah bakers. They get orders on Thursday night or Friday morning for however many challahs the community wants. And as you saw in the documentary, their specialty is green chili challah. And that's what we filmed them doing. And we use that metaphor throughout the film, the challah being made, the 5-strand challah, and with a kind of a beauty that it's, rising in the desert, a metaphor for Jewish communities rising everywhere, and the desert nurturing this specific community as it's, being the place for these wonderful challahs that are being made and picked up Friday afternoon by community members or delivered by the challah makers, who are a great, great team. They are hilarious. They're such a team, because imagine this, every Friday morning, like at 4 in the morning or 5 in the morning, they get together and they get to work. And I couldn't think of anything more visual to start the documentary with.
Personally, I think I wouldn't be a big green chili challah person, but that's just me. But when you talk
wait
about,
till you taste it. I'm gonna fix it. You know what? You toast it the next day and you put cream cheese on it, and well, unless you don't like spicy food, then there's nothing I can do about that.
I'm just kidding. When you talk about the 5 strands, when you're putting together the film and the research, was there one strand that, like, I don't know, was most enjoyable, or you found most interesting, or was maybe hardest to get information about, as you put together the film?
They were all interesting, and some of them I found out more about them as we went along, interviewing different people, making testimonials about the different strands of Jewish, presence in New Mexico. I gotta say though, what initially drew me to New Mexico is that, old West pioneering generation, the generation that came, from the East Coast, actually, with the Santa Fe Trail, Jewish merchants looking for opportunity, all the way from New York, mostly New York, I should say, like the Spiegelberg brothers, and others, and very adventurous, enterprising people. They would, hook up with the Santa Fe Trail, come all the way down to New Mexico, and they started settling. And again, just the romance of the Old West, the Spanish, Mexican Old West, now receiving, East Coast, basically colonialist merchants. And by the way, not stopping in Santa Fe, but continuing down the Camino Real. And a lot of these merchants
big box
would have their cousins continue down the Santa Fe Trail and set up their enterprises in Chihuahua, Mexico, which is across the border from New Mexico. So that story really appealed to me. However, I gotta say, when I discovered that many of the counterculture in the 60s, including, the Reconstructionist rabbis, would actually be a large part of the communes that were happening in New Mexico, and that I first saw in Easy Rider when Dennis Hopper and Peter Fonda stop in one of the communes that some of the people that I interviewed actually lived at back in the 60s. So that part was really exciting. And then, of course, I found out why in Los Alamos, the development of the atomic bomb in the 40s during World War II under Oppenheimer, I laughingly said, oh, the Manhattan Project. Well, because half of the scientists were Yids from New York. So maybe that's why they called it the Manhattan Project. So again, and of course, the discovery for me really, as you know, the first strand is the Converso Jews, the colonial era Jews. So, I gotta say each strand was really, really fascinating. But again, I was drawn to kind of the Old West magic of New Mexico. And when I say the Old West, I include the Mexican period, which is so, imbued in the whole culture and experience of New Mexico.
And talking about the conversos, Robert came up with a question here. He's asking if there are any Portuguese crypto Jews or conversos who came to New Mexico or other parts of the southern U.S. or Mexico.
Well, yes, specifically Portuguese, yes, because when the Jews were originally expelled from Spain by the Catholic kings, their first refuge was found in Portugal. So many of them actually, kind of became, quote unquote, Portuguese Jews. And as a matter of fact, in the New World, in the so-called New World, in the Caribbean, and a lot of parts of the Americas, Portuguese was kind of code for Jewish. The first synagogue in the continental United States, in the East Coast, was actually founded by, quote unquote, Portuguese Jews. So many Jews became Portuguese Jews by virtue of the fact that they found refuge. The King of Portugal gave them refuge when they were being expelled from Spain. However, when the King of Portugal wanted to marry the princess, the daughter of the Catholic kings from Spain, the first requisite that the Catholic kings made is you have to kick out the Jews from Portugal or have them convert to Christianity. And as a last comment on this whole Portuguese identity, if you take a look at my subsequent film, A Long Journey, The Hidden Jews of the Southwest, which deals specifically with conversos, with crypto Jews, or the so-called Anusim, we feature Ron Hart, who was at that time president of the Jewish Federation in Albuquerque, based out of Albuquerque. And they had the Sephardic certification program where they were working with the governments of Spain and Portugal, and anybody that could document Sephardic ancestry going back to Spain or Portugal, or persecution of their families by the Inquisition because of their Jewish background, they would be certified by the Albuquerque Jewish Federation through rabbis and academics that looked over the genealogical record of these petitioners, and both Portugal and Spain granted citizenship as a form of reparation, if you will, for what they did to Jewish communities. And I heard that Portugal was a little more flexible in terms of granting Portuguese citizenship. And I must say that a few of my nephews have gotten Portuguese citizenship, even though they were not crypto Jews or Anusim. They are Sephardic. We are Sephardic on my mother's side, the Nahmiya side. And that was sufficient. They immediately had the documentation lined up. They received citizenship. And for them, their main goal was to maybe do graduate work in Europe. Doesn't have to be Portugal, and take advantage of the European, communities, working and studying possibilities for European citizens, as actually, Portuguese citizens are.
Here's a comment from Cindy. She says, I'm originally from New Mexico, and some of the people that were featured in the film are relatives of hers. They immigrated from Germany to America in the mid 1800s. And she says, nicely done. So thanks for the comment there, Cindy. I guess, so you're in San Diego.
What was Cindy's family name in New Mexico?
Go ahead, Cindy.
Bebo.
What is it?
Bebo, Solomon
Oh
Bebo.
my God, yes. We definitely feature your relatives in this film. And as our audience will remember, Solomon Bebo was the governor of the Yakima Pueblo, and we interviewed the outgoing governor of the Yakima Pueblo, and he remembers being really good friends with the sons and daughters of Solomon Bebo. So we had that direct testimonial of somebody that knew the family Bebo, and I'm quite honored to have you as part of my audience. Solomon Bebo was a real inspiration in the making of this film.
Yes, he had many brothers and sisters, and they all immigrated from Germany. And as children, we heard all the stories about them. My parents are distant cousins, and my father's grandmother and my mother's grandfather were both Bebos, and they were brothers and sisters of Solomon. And also my mother's family, their name wasn't mentioned yet, but their last name was Florsheim, and he was a very large cattle rancher in the northeastern quadrant of the state of New Mexico.
Oh yeah, Florsheim is a very, very well-known name in the state of New Mexico. Have you ever been to the Yakima Pueblo, Cindy?
Many times.
Yeah, it's really an inspirational place.
Yes, it's very nice. Thank you. You did a very nice job on it. I'm glad I caught it. I sent Justin an email yesterday because I only heard about it yesterday, and he sent it to me. So I watched it this morning and was able to participate this afternoon. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
So Isaac, you live in San Diego, and I think this film came out in 2018? Is that right? Or
let's see. I think no, a little bit
later.
2016, I believe. Yeah.
How many trips did you make to New Mexico throughout the process of making this film, from research, shooting, interviewing? How is that spread out and stuff like that?
Including my fundraising trips, which occupies 80% of my productive time. Good question. Specifically for Challah Rising. Well, I was invited to meet with a community with members of the Jewish Historical Society by Paula. We had a nice meeting at her house. That was the initial meeting. And we began to raise funds. So much I didn't mean it sarcastically, it's very real. And as a filmmaker nowadays, our production development is so tied to the fundraising phases. So we cobbled up some money and we said, in order to more effectively fundraise and to further develop our story, my knowledge of Jewish New Mexico, let's shoot a certain amount of interviews. So we said, okay. And a lot of the interviews that you see actually take place in what was then Paula and her husband, Melvin Schwartz's home. They had a beautiful, beautiful New Mexico home. And it was like a set. I would point in different directions and get different backgrounds that were very reminiscent of New Mexico. And of course, we would sneak in the outdoor, the chile, those red chile riestras, the garlands, and so on. And also, I remember another trip that I went specifically, not to shoot, but to see this landmark exhibit that you saw in the film, which was Fractured Fates, the Spanish Jews. And if you can imagine where we shot, you saw it, you don't have to imagine it. The entire main gallery of the main history museum at the Palace of the Governors in New Mexico, a wonderful, wonderful building at the plaza. They converted it into the Jewish synagogue in Toledo, Spain, as the exhibit area. So you literally felt you were walking in to the synagogue, and then saw the incredible experience of which, where you saw Ron Hart being interviewed in front of a 15th century Sephardic Torah that came especially from Spain for the occasion. So for me, that was wonderful research. I got to meet Ron Hart, who's really a heavy hitting scholar, and got to confer with my producer further about strategies. But then after we did another demo based on the initial interviews, I went back to New Mexico, continued to fundraise, and got enough funding to finally go back a third or fourth time and finish what we call principal photography. Mm-hmm. All the interviews were in the can, so to speak, and we were ready to pull out the yellow highlighter to create what is known as the A-roll. My first cut, always the first cut we call the A-roll. It's just a technical term that comes from news media. Your A-roll is all your interviews, all the talking heads. And we also refer to it as the radio cut, because you can just close your eyes and for all practical purposes, it's a radio show, because there's no photographs, no historical footage, no graphics, nothing like that. And once we had the A-roll, we got a lot of the material. Nowadays, with the magic of the internet, you can download the photographs from the collections of museums and archives. Some of the guys that shot the New Mexico hippie footage of the communes, we made contact through the museum. He transferred that Super 8 to video. We got that. So we started assembling that. And once we had a very, not a fine cut, but an approximation of the cut that we wanted with the B-roll. The B-roll is, of course, the graphics, the footage, the old photos that you illustrate the A-roll with. We do what we always do. My wife and I, we've been producing together for a long time. We always leave a small war chest, because once you have your cut, you say, okay, what's missing? What do we need? We got to get we have a little bit of resources to go back. So that was a fourth trip to New Mexico to shoot, maybe a few landscapes, maybe a few pickup interviews. For instance, we wanted to shoot one of the trading posts in New Mexico, in Albuquerque, and the couple that own Bobrick, Mr. Bobrick and his wife, his lovely wife, of course, let us shoot at this great trading post, which was now a formal store. They were the actual owners. Their families bought the original Wright's Trading Post, the legendary Wright's Trading Post in Albuquerque. They had moved to a smaller store because the original building, unfortunately, was torn down. It was closer to downtown by the train station. But I started talking to Mrs. Bobrick, and I said, she was saying, oh, well, I'm originally from Chihuahua, as you saw in the documentary. And I go, oh my God, this is an amazing story. How did you come here? Well, my parents sent me to school, and I met this nice Jewish boy that became my husband. And her parents were also in the trading post business, the curio shops. So we immediately connected. And I told Sergio, my director of photography, Sergio, can we shoot? We didn't bring all the light. We're just doing pickup shots. And we placed Mrs. Bobrick next to the window, bound some light, put a microphone in her, and we got a wonderful testimonial. And that was really kind of what we call the second unit pickup shots. So you got to be ready for everything. And that's where you round out your documentary, come back to your editing room, and then hope that you got everything you need to do the fine cut. Then from the fine cut, you call your online studio, you do your color corrections, you mix your sound, because at the same time, your composer is composing all the music cues as you're editing. We were very lucky. We've been lucky to work with composers. The composers in Hollow Rising and I go back to Tijuana Jews. So as we were editing, they would provide the cues. And then if you have music while you're editing, if you don't have to wait till you cut everything to get the music score, it's great because you're cutting to the music or what's going to be your actual final music score.
So this question comes from Robert. He's asking, besides the Jewish community interaction with the Acomo Pueblo, were there any cultural and or business exchanges with Navajo, Hopi, or Zuni, or other Native American tribes? And did they ever share religious worship or prayer services together?
Yes. Very specifically, well, for one thing, Bobrick of the Rights Trading Post talks about the fact that Jewish merchants worked directly with Navajo artisans to create a lot of the wonderful Southwestern, jewelry, basketry, pottery that we now, that is highly prized. In the old days, Mr. Bobrick says, Isaac, to tell you the truth, in the beginning, a lot of the trading posts just kind of sold shmatas that we brought from Mexico, pretending they were Southwest art. Nothing wrong with shmatas from Mexico. They put me through college. My dad had a curio shop in Tijuana, but there was a relationship that was started in largely with Jewish merchants commissioning and supporting specifically Navajo artists. And in the case of Mr. Bobrick, he actually went to UNM and studied silversmithing so he could better communicate with the artisans. Many of them that Mr. Bobrick worked with as a merchant commissioning this work were, are now highly collectible artists from New Mexico. The other connection with the Native community came through the Indian Medical Service. There was, in our documentary, one of the founders of the, there was a very big push for home birthing. So UNM, its nursing program, focused on home birthing, because I think to this day, 30% of the births in New Mexico are home births, and they would specifically go to the different regions where there was an Indian medical service clinics to train nurses in home birthing. So there was a very vital connection with the Native community. And, the founder of the Jewish, of the nursing program was a lovely Jewish lady that appears in the film. And not only lovely, a very heavy hitter in her field. She's known as the godmother of the home birthing program in New Mexico. And another Native contact that I had when we were working at Congregation Albert, I didn't meet him personally, but there was a Jewish artist of Navajo background who actually makes these wonderful taluses with Native American designs that you saw the rabbi in the trailer, as a matter of fact, wearing one of them. So that was another wonderful cultural connection with the Native community through this Native Navajo artist.
David says, first off, thanks to you for the film, and he really appreciated, he has a number of New Mexico family connections, so really enjoyed watching the film, although none of the connections are actually in the film. They don't go for that far back, and also, I guess, some klezmer Kirky friends that were featured. His question is, did New Mexico's advanced film industry have a positive or any impact on your film, or was that not a factor?
Oh, very good question. When we went there were all kinds of productions going on. As many of you know, the Albuquerque studios are a major studio complex, I think taken over by Netflix now. There's so much production in New Mexico because of its tax advantages to productions that a lot of production companies not just go there to shoot, but they've established their offices in Santa Fe, and who wouldn't want to, live and work in Santa Fe? But I have to say something funny. I wasn't able to really benefit from it because I wanted to hire locally, but everybody was working in a production. I wanted some local, I did get a couple of people, but I was not able to hire people. And people would tell me, listen, Isaac, for instance, location managers, if you want a location manager, you want somebody from New Mexico that knows the locations, but they're all busy. So we have to fly in location managers from LA, and they, with Google, they find us the locations, So, but there was a real buzz, and we can really get resources. And actually, subsequently, in a long journey, we collaborated with KNME, the local PBS affiliate, and they also brought a local industry connection. So yeah, it's very much benefiting production, and it's helpful to all filmmakers. Have a wonderful film commission there in New Mexico, and it's very exciting.
And going back to the fundraising, when you're putting together a film like this, what is one of the biggest expenses you have? Is it like, what is the biggest expense, I guess, when putting together a film? And are you able to share like what the budget was for the film?
Sure. The biggest expenses, well, they're kind of well spread in pre-production, production, and post-production. Of course, pre-production is the least expensive because it's just you and your inner circle, your producer, maybe your DP, scouting, and getting on the phones, interviewing people you're developing. So that's basically your overhead. And if you can kind of carve out a little salary for yourselves, so there's not a lot of money being spent. And then the rest of the expenses are evenly spread, I think, between production and post-production. In production, you get up your crew, you rent the equipment, your vehicles, you travel a lot, you pay for a lot of hotels, meals, and so on. So that's a big chunk of your budget. I would say probably 30% of your budget. And then in post-production, not because you have a big crew, because you just have basically an editor and hopefully an assistant editor and your composer, but that's a long-term process. You can shoot your project in 3 to 4 weeks. Your post-production might take 3 or 4 months easily. So you're paying, for your editing room, your editor, your composers at work. So that's about 30–40% of your, so 20% for pre-production development, 40 for production, and 40 for post-production. Challah Rising cost approximately $175,000. And actually for a PBS style feature length, that is a very, very low budget. I'm very proud to say that as an indie, I've done indie features. I've gotten really good at consolidating expenses. For instance, my director of photography, with him comes an entire camera package. So we make a deal where I don't have to go out and rent from somebody else. That would be a more expensive proposition, but he gives me a whole package deal. And sometimes he'll throw in his vehicle, so that saves us money too. Or we rent a vehicle, what have you. So that's kind of like the, and you know, a lot of work now, we all have offices in our homes. So that helps to amortize, you know, so your expenses go to pay a little bit for your rent, your home rent or your mortgage. So that way of consolidating is very, very cost effective, if you will. And that's what allows us to keep the cost really down. And then bottom line is, even though I don't like to do it as much because I have to make a living, you defer a lot of your expenses. You know, okay, I won't take a salary for this phase, and hopefully when we sell the film, we'll make it back. It never happens. Basically, we have wonderful, wonderful distribution, but our main channels of distribution are public television, which generally they don't pay for product. If you can get a sponsor when you air it, that's great, and sometimes we do. So that's the nuts and bolts of indie production for documentaries.
In addition to, you know, like PBS, obviously what we're doing today, which is kind of like a, you know, screening amongst congregations. Someone asked, Bruce and Carla asked about, you know, how can they see other films in the series? So there's also, they can head to your website and purchase there.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Cinewest, CINEWST.net. You can actually, we've worked out the technology where people can purchase and download the video or order the DVD, and we will ship.
I just had a question I forgot. So yeah, so your most recent film is not this one, it's A Long Journey, Hidden Jews of the Southwest. That's the most recently completed one. Is that
Yes,
right?
correct. Yeah.
And that film came from a stronger interest in crypto Jew. It came from kind of this film, right? And it led to a bigger production on crypto Jews in that film. Is that correct? Or how did that all come about?
As you remember from all of you that watched Challah Rising, we do deal with the first trend of the challah bread, which is the colonial Jews. And and this is when we were distributing, this is pre-pandemic, we showed it at a lot of film festivals. I remember fondly the Tucson Jewish Film Festival, many screenings in New Mexico. We actually had a wonderful screening at the Museum of Natural History with a giant screen. The landscapes of New Mexico never looked better. And now, since we're shooting with 4K technology, those images really hold up beautifully. So one of the things that we noticed at the Q&As, instead of getting questions from the audience, very, very often we would get 2 or 3 people that would get up at different times of the discussion, and instead of a question, they would make kind of a heartfelt testimonial revelation about their crypto-Judaic roots. Yeah, I'm from northern New Mexico, and my grandmother would light candles on Fridays. We were Catholic, and we would ask her, Grandma, what are you doing? Oh, it's just an old family custom on Fridays. And she would mumble these unintelligible prayers. And it was just Grandma doing her thing, you know. And also other people would say, well, and they would be telling us this. And he said, almost like it was like a revelation that they were making in front of a large audience. And the fact that they buried their dead in pine boxes and covered mirrors during their, you know, mourning periods and so on. And so we said to Paul, we knew about these customs, of course, because we had dealt with it, but I said, we got to do a documentary about crypto Jews. And we took a different approach with crypto Jews because we said, you know, let's, instead of doing a whole interview with 40 or 50 people, I mean, series of interviews with 40 or 50 people, why don't we select certain Jewish individuals that are representative of the Converso experience? And of course, I got a call from Paula. I was just at a Jewish Federation banquet, and next to me sat the Herrera family. And guess what? They're crypto Jews that have returned to the religion, and they're wanting to make Aliyah in Israel. And I go, well, what does he do? Well, he actually raises cattle in northern New Mexico, in Cuba, New Mexico. And I said, a converso Jew from Cuba, New Mexico. There's a story there, a converso cowboy, no less. So, and then, of course, we knew from Ron Hart, whom we worked with before, about the whole program, the Sephardic certification program. And there was a converso, an actual rabbi who returned to the faith after being raised as a Catholic, whom you will see, or those of you that have seen A Long Journey, Rabbi Jordy was also somebody that we followed. And then, of course, the amazing Rabbi Leon out of El Paso, Texas, who's one of the pioneering rabbis in bringing Jews back. He actually says it's actually a process of return. You're not converting back to Judaism. Your families were forced to convert to Catholicism, so now you're coming back. Although we followed Rabbi Leon across the border to Juarez, because there's a small community of Jews that want to return, but they don't have visas to come to the States. So we followed him, Rabbi Leon, who wrote a great book about his experiences, Rabbi Stephen Leon. We go to El Paso, to a cafe in downtown Juarez, across the border from El Paso to Mexican city of Juarez. And you go to the cafe and they have a mezuzah when you go in. And there was 40 or 50 people eagerly awaiting the rabbi because he gives them Judaism lessons. And he says to them, I know that you're really Jewish in your hearts. You are Jewish. And to me, you're not converting, you're returning. But I want to give you complete lessons in Judaism so you're 100% kosher. In case you want to go to Israel, you can make Aliyah. So this is what we're doing. And then he proceeds with his interpreters in English, with interpreters going to Spanish, just giving Judaism lessons to a very adoring crowd. They're so grateful because in Mexico, the Jewish community, the mainstream Jewish communities in Mexico are not very keen on any conversions, whether you're crypto-Jewish or somebody that just wants to convert to Judaism. It's a lot harder in Mexico. So to have a rabbi like Leon that actually goes across the border and helps them with their return to Judaism means a lot to them.
Can you talk more about the El Paso film coming up and you know,
oh, sure,
what stage that's in? Yeah.
Well, you know, when I started envisioning these series of documentaries as the Frontier Jews series, I wanted to sort of have it as bookends, sort of where the Southwest begins in terms of the Jewish historical saga, which is El Paso, and it ends in San Diego. I already had finished Tijuana Jews and a portrait of Jewish San Diego, so I had that covered. The San Diego. And after finishing A Long Journey, The Hidden Jews of El Paso, and shooting extensively in El Paso, a lot of interest came about to finish or to do a piece on El Paso. I laughingly joke with Rabbi Leon, we've done the history of colonial Jews in El Paso. Now we got to do the Marty Robbins version of the Jewish community with the whole, you know, allure of the Old West, which El Paso is very significant about. And I mentioned to Rabbi Leon that my family was once in the El Paso Juarez area. They also had a curio shop in Juarez, a big tourist town, at least at the time when my family was there back in the 50s. I said to Rabbi Leon, as a matter of fact, my grandmother Rivka Artenstein is buried here in El Paso. And he says, yes, as a matter of fact, she's in the B'nai Zion cemetery. And so and then doing research about El Paso, which is a fascinating town. and with a fascinating Jewish history. I was getting testimonials of people that had grandparents who had big stores, like the popular store in El Paso, where Pancho Villa actually would come across the border to purchase, supplies for his troops. And they had great tales that Pancho Villa, in fact, was very friendly with a lot of the Jewish merchants. And a fellow by the name of Stuart Schwartz, whose family owned the popular store, by the way, the first store to hire Black people in the state of Texas. He would say that sometimes they would get into trouble with Pancho Villa because Pancho Villa would come and he would like to, shop at the store. But at the same time, some of the federal officers on the other side would also come to shop. So they would have to sneak in Pancho Villa into the elevator, take him to a different floor while the federal officers were shopping in the downstairs. So there were just great stories and great stories about El Paso. But one of the most significant things that you kind of try to get the essence, what is special about this Jewish community? Well, what is special about this Jewish community, that they're at one of the most important binational crossing, the pass, El Paso, as implied in its name, between the US and Mexico since colonial times. Since Native American times. It's just a very important, centrally, geographically located mountain pass where human populations have gone through. And what's very significant in terms of the Jewish community, that El Paso has a long history of helping Jews migrate into the US. For instance, when my grandfather, Fischl Artenstein, came from Poland in the 1920s, there were quotas that were established at Ellis Island that only certain people from certain countries would come in during a certain time. My grandfather, being a Jewish Polish immigrant, was not able to take advantage of the quotas. As a matter of fact, Ellis Island was pretty much closed to Jewish migration at that time, and other migrations. So the next port of entry was Veracruz. So that's where my grandfather came in. And I found out something fascinating about a legendary El Paso rabbi that had a lot to do with facilitating this migration. A lot of the Jews would come in, they were able to come in through Mexico, and eventually they would make their way up north and try to get across in El Paso. And that's why Rabbi Zelenka, the Jewish community of El Paso, became very, very instrumental. There was, in fact, besides Rabbi Zelenka, the Jewish committee, the Jewish Women's Committee in El Paso was a national organization, but in El Paso, they focused on helping these refugees. And as a matter of fact, there is the entire archives, correspondence of the Jewish Women's Committee at the University of Texas, El Paso, with letters from would-be immigrants, Jewish immigrants, that had come in through Mexico and wanted to come into El Paso, and they would get help. In the case of Rabbi Zelenka, who was active in the early part of the 20th century, a member of Congregation Mount Sinai, which is one of our collaborators, right, Justin, in terms of the programs. Rabbi Zelenka is very revered there. There's a hall named after him. He actually was part of negotiations with the Mexican government to maybe purchase a part of Baja California to settle Jews there that were fleeing from the pogroms and all the persecution that was happening right at the beginning of the 20th century in the Russian Empire, namely, but throughout Europe. That project, which is very well documented, there's actually a book about that project, about bringing in Jews and settling them in Mexico in a kind of a pre-Israel Jewish colony, but it didn't materialize because the Mexican Revolution exploded and Mexico was no longer a very safe place to bring in immigrants of any background. So that's the El Paso documentary, and I continue to make pitches for anybody that wants to donate, you have my website. You can get a hold of me if this is something of interest to you, or if you have stories about El Paso, maybe you have family there. With the 2 Q&As that we made, Justin, I've actually had wonderful people to come in and join and share stories. For instance, the Mary Ann Plout, the librarian of Temple Mount Sinai, has been a treasure trove of stories, documentaries. She sends me documents, books about El Paso Jewish history with a very significant, the rabbis of El Paso have kind of a very scholarly activist reputation. Among them, Rabbi Fierman, who was my co-producer's rabbi, Paula Mar Schwartz's rabbi in Pittsburgh before he came to El Paso. Well, Rabbi Fierman is one of the pioneering chroniclers of the Jewish experience in the Southwest. I have his books looking at me, Guts and Ruts, Roots and Boots by Rabbi Fierman. Again, a pioneer of Jewish history, published Jewish history from the Southwest. So that's, as you can tell, I'm highly excited about El Paso. It's a very, very unique town. And also, as a border town, I've really connected with that community. It's they see Tijuana Jews and they say, my God, you're really telling our story in El Paso. And these are people that remember how easy it was to cross the border in the old days. There was not the whole rigmarole, the fear. I mean, you went to eat lunch in Juarez or Tijuana, came back in the afternoon, no big deal. Or you went shopping at the main central markets in Mexico and came back. Or a lot of Mexican people came in. I mean, a lot of people don't know this, but when there's border closures or huge long lines, the main people that suffer are really the merchants on the American side. They depend a lot on the Mexican trade. So there's just a whole wonderful story about the border that, transcends all the stereotypes. Some of the stereotypes are true, the dark legends, the vice industries, they've been active for, a better part of a century. But the bottom line is, growing up, there were just 2 communities that were really joined together. As I said before, my family had a store, lived in Juarez, Chihuahua, but they were members of B'nai Zion. For the high holidays, for some Shabbat services, they would come across the border. And the same dynamic here in Tijuana and San Diego. I don't know if I've answered your question. I just but yeah, the El Paso documentary, there you have it.
And I put Isaac's email here in the bottom of the chat and also his website. So you can check out kind of some of the great work he's done to kind of highlight, Jews of the Southwest. And if you have any, can be helpful to him, as far as content, fundraising for his next film, you can direct him there or contact me and I can let him know. Is there any other questions that they want to put in the chat or even speak aloud about the film, Challah Rising, about being a filmmaker, all that good stuff?
No questions, comments, regrets?
Any suggestion that Isaac could have done better? No, I'm just kidding.
Sure, I can take criticism. I teach documentary film, and you framed the question with, what can we do better? It's not about putting anything down. It's like, hey, is there
yeah, sure. But I really want to thank first off, Isaac, we've done a couple of programs together. Really enjoyed the one in March and glad we were able to do this one today and adjust it from Houston to US wide. So our partners in Highland Park and Ventura County in Ventura, California, and also in Albany could join us. Really appreciate it. And
hey, Justin, hate to interrupt. I did see a question pop up that's kind of interesting. Did you see it?
Yep, go for it.
Well, what did you say who it's from and what the question is?
So the question's from Bruce and Carlin. It says, please talk about the BRCA gene.
The BRCA gene, yes. That's sort of the Rosetta Stone for understanding crypto Jews in New Mexico. Some of you might remember, God, I'm forgetting the names, but the doctor, the radiologist in Challah Rising, where he talks about working with an oncologist. He was part of the Indian medical service, this doctor who we interviewed. And they're doing work. He's doing work with an oncologist in northern New Mexico that, unfortunately, for the women, there was a high incidence of breast cancer. And as some of you might know, the BRCA gene is a strong indicator of breast cancer in women. And it's also a gene that, unfortunately, Jewish communities have, whether they're Ashkenazi or Sephardic. Well, guess what? A lot of women in northern New Mexico were showing up with the BRCA gene. And when they were interviewed by the oncologist and the radiologist, they would say the same stories. Yeah, grandma lit candles on Friday nights. We didn't eat pork. And, you know, the family was very secretive about our practices, even though we were Catholic. And sure enough, the DNA and their genealogy showed that they were of Jewish descent. The good news is that the BRCA gene, you know, was confirmed, and there was, you know, at an early stage. So many of these women did not have cancer, but they were able to now be more conscious about getting more regular checkups. And again, that BRCA gene was in fact the you know, the indicator that helped to both, you know, identify, you know, the potential presence of breast cancer, but also as a key to seeing or understanding the presence of Jews in northern New Mexico.
Cool.
Along with the green chili challah, of course.
I like raisins. Nah, just plain's good for me. But anyway, any other questions out there about anything? All right. Well, again, thanks for everyone for coming. You know, we'll stick on here for a little bit. So if you want to say hi to Isaac informally, feel free to stay on. But again, thanks to Isaac for joining us. I'm San Diego. Thanks to our partner congregations, and hopefully we can do another film, you know, virtual film screening Q&A coming up soon. So thanks again.